I'm Hannah Calhoun, VP of Innovation here at the Financial Health Network. Not only do I lead our innovation work, but I have the pleasure of overseeing the Financial Solutions Lab, the Financial Health Network's flagship innovation initiative, which is backed by founding partner JPMorgan Chase and supporting partner Prudential. At the Financial Solutions Lab, we support innovative solutions to financial health challenges, especially those faced by low to moderate income individuals and Black and Latinx communities. And in 2020, we focused on solutions to the challenges faced by workers and students. Even before the pandemic, the financial health of millions of workers and students across the country was precarious. Consider that in spring of 2020, a national survey by the Hope Center found that nearly 3 out of 5 university students were experiencing basic needs insecurity. That means they weren't able to afford food or housing. When they leave school, many of these students are burdened by debt. Student loan debt is now the second highest consumer debt category. At $17 trillion, it's second only to mortgage debt and higher than debt for both credit cards and auto loans. And entering the workforce is no guarantee of stability. An estimated 15.5 million Americans are in alternative work arrangements without access to traditional benefits like disability, health insurance, or paid time off. And we know that up to 1/3 of American workers will need to change jobs or retrain due to the changing economy by 2030. Today, I'm joined by 3 experts whose organizations are working to change the financial future for workers and students. Michael Collins is Vice President at JFF, a national nonprofit that drives change in the American workforce and education systems to increase economic advancement for all. He leads a new JFF effort to increase equity in education, employment, earnings, and economic mobility outcomes for Black learners and workers. Sanket Karuri is head of product at Equity, where he leads the research, design, and implementation of anti-poverty technology, connecting students to emergency aid dollars and non-monetary resources. Equity participated in the Financial Solutions Lab's 2020 Accelerator. Previously, he was the product lead for the College Board Opportunity Scholarships, a program that uses scholarships ranging from $500 to $40,000 to incentivize students to take the right steps en route to a quality college choice. And finally, Bridget Tate. Bridget is Change Machine's Director of National Accounts. In this role, Bridget leads virtual coaching direct services and the programs team for Change Machine. Change Machine builds financial security through people-powered technology that reaches social service organizations and public agencies nationwide. They were also a 2020 FSL Exchange Grant recipient. Prior to her role at Change Machine, Bridget was the Deputy Director for a HUD housing agency in Durham, North Carolina. Bridget has worked in nonprofit for the last 20 years, working directly with consumer debt, policy, and racial inequities. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to kick us off with a couple of questions, but we're hoping to have time to take Q&A from the audience. So if you're listening, please put your questions in the chat. Sanket, I'll start with you. Talk to us about the effects you're seeing of the pandemic on students.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you all for joining. The Equity's been around since before the pandemic. We do decisioning and disbursement of emergency aid, but as the pandemic started to unfold, it set off a series of shocks, right, that are going to change the landscape of their post-secondary experience in the long run, right? Immediately after the pandemic started, we saw, as you described in the Hope report, levels of basic needs and security rise. And one of the caveats that I would put to that data even is that it doesn't account for the students who dropped out, right? And so it's important to note that with all of this data in the background, we're seeing, depending on where you are, depending on the segment of students that you're talking about, really high rates of dropout. And so I think it's important to think about both what's going on for the students that are still persevering through in school, but also those that we have lost and hope to get back into the college-going experience. We work on doing decisioning and disbursement, as I said, for colleges and universities, and there was that initial shock to students, but there was a concurrent shock to the folks trying to serve them, right? There was a shock to state and local budgets, and particularly those in student services and administering emergency aid. So at the same time that you saw need for direct services and emergency aid go through the roof, those departments and those individuals were crippled, right, in doing the very important work that they do. And so that initial landscape during the pandemic brought about a lot of philanthropic aid, right, where colleges and universities were working with their partners to get as much assistance out as possible. So we did play a role there. But now as the pandemic has unfolded and these recovery acts have taken place, it's been another set of shocks, right? You sort of have that student shock that's continuing, but you have these new policy and regulatory implications on the folks who want to serve them, who are being given massive influxes of capital. There's finally that recognition that the real cost of college, that the reason why students drop out is not their immediate debt during college, but the cost of going to college, as they are oft parents, right? More than half of the students that we work with are student parents, right? They are working and upskilling during their experience. And so it's important to note that as this massive influx of capital comes in, you don't have those departments in colleges and universities to really do that work and administer this money, and you have real regulatory concerns in doing so. So coming out of the pandemic for students, there is that hope that we've recognized that the problem can be solved, not totally solved, but really alleviated. We can improve retention and graduation rates with direct cash assistance and getting to know the student's individualized situation. But the infrastructure isn't there yet to effectively distribute that capital, and the promises of that capital in the years to come are still awaiting. So there's hope for students, but there's a long way to go.
Thank you. And it's interesting to hear you talk about both sort of the needs you saw developing with students and also with schools and institutions. Bridget, Change Machine helps social service organizations provide financial counseling and support to their clients. And so you also are working with two different sets of constituencies. I'd love to hear more about what you heard from your partners about how their clients' needs were changing during the pandemic and how Change Machine shifted your services to adjust to that.
Absolutely. In the context of this conversation, while we do work with variances of organizations, I'm going to focus on the work that we're doing currently with HBCU students and what we've been doing with college students and alumni and faculty and family over the course of the last 2 years. Much to what was said prior, the insecurities that have existed were just unveiled in regards to on a national and global level. These are not things that we did not know before in regards to what impedes graduation, retention, the struggles that students, especially Black and Brown students, face as they travel through the university process of get higher education. And we have known for quite some time that the student loan debt, the difference between white student loan borrowers and Black and Brown student loan borrowers is extremely concerning. And so this is what we were digging into prior to the pandemic. And what happened was crisis hit crisis. And what it did is it continued to exacerbate a system that is currently broken. And because I'm primarily solely working with 4 HBCUs across the nation, I think some context that I can give you, what I'm hearing from working with these partners in regards to the pandemic, at the time that it hit and shutting down, one of the things that really became polarized is that the reliance on student housing for housing when schools begin to close down. It helped us to examine, again, the racial wealth gap. Parents had to come get students. Students had to get home, and there was no money set aside for that. And so we're further digging into this from many lenses. One, again, it's a system that's broken on a higher level when we talk about federal debt and student loan. There is a lack of investment, or had been, because what also happened during the pandemic is George Floyd, and advocacy and voices became louder. And so what we're seeing, much to, I don't want to get your name right, Sanket said, is that there's now this eye on HBCUs that have always been traditionally underfunded, and there is money pouring in. There is definitely money, and funders are interested, but how to disperse that money and how to do it in an equitable way for students that are going to benefit, so that the retention rates and the amount of debt that they incur in seeking their education. And so we came into this engagement to help universities embed financial securities within their existing programs on campus. And we were primarily working with student services. And so that would be like TRIO programs, those students who receive additional funding due to having received Pell Grants, students who are in disciplinary, some type of corrections, and how that correlates to how you're managing your money and your forward thinking of consequences. And we use coaching in that model as well. But we've made, while we're all still doing that, we have really gotten excited about some of the positives and the highlights that's happened, is that sense of advocacy and policy has become larger for students. And that also has streamlined and bled into alumni, faculty. Often what you will find at HBCUs are many faculties are alumni of other HBCUs and have that type of debt that they're still carrying as well way into their adulthood that they haven't paid off. And so we're currently doing some roundtables, putting together some panels and things of that nature, but not for us to make the decisions and the clarifications as to where the corrections need to be made, but to assure that these individuals are all at the table and that we're bringing them together and convening them together to look towards those solutions. And so some of the things that, I think that's going to be one of your questions, Hannah. Don't let me, I can go on forever. Feel free to stop me any time. So to answer your question, what we've seen is that a need to help to support coalitions, definitely policy data in regards to the whys, the hows. As we move forward in this conversation, one of the things I'm definitely going to be talking about is how can we help to do some type of reparations around student loan debt that is equitable to the Black and Brown community. Also, what does UBI look like at this point? Right? We've just seen an infusion of how much money come into this country overnight. So short but sweet in that portion, but those are some of the things and needs that the campuses have been sharing and students have been sharing with me.
Great, thank you. And yes, we are going to come back to the questions about policy and policy reform in just a second. But before we do, I want to turn to Michael. I heard in both Sanket and Bridget's responses some conversation around really institutional and organizational and societal infrastructure around supporting students and workers, both pre and post-pandemic. And I would love to hear what you see the lessons are from the past year in terms of how we can better support learners.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate the previous comments. And at a macro level, the short answer is that those systems and structures and infrastructure, not only were they not connected, they were sclerotic, right, and could not meet the moment, right. So our major lessons from kind of the pandemic and some of the racial unrest that Bridget was talking about is that it's a clear example that, the future is here. We talked about kind of the future of work and jobs for the future. Well, the future came really quickly, and it demanded that our systems be connected, right? Like it demanded that our post-secondary system be connected to our workforce development system, right? And they weren't connected. So you had people who were, perhaps in a traditional post-secondary kind of pathway, COVID happens, things shut down, all of a sudden the employment mix is different, jobs went away, people needed to plug into kind of rapid skilling opportunities to get available jobs. And where were they to go, right? They were isolated. It wasn't clear where to go. And so I think the major lesson for us is that, this moment really exposed that we really don't have the agile and connected post-secondary system and workforce development system that we need to have a strong economy and to really, kind of keep learners and workers out of harm's way for these types of disruption, right? I think that we know that this was a great example that not only can these disruptions happen, but I think the opportunity is for us to I agree with Bridget. There's some bright spots and, some things that we can learn. So one of the clear things we need to do is to ensure that our systems are connected, our short-term and long-term credentials are connected, and we're seeing, kind of skilling, kind of rapid reskilling and upskilling opportunities kind of happen both at the, kind of the state level, the regional level. There are, skilling platforms like, Guild and, kind of Skill Up, but all of these things need to be connected, right? And we also need clear navigation, right? Career navigation. How do we help learners and workers understand what training and opportunities are out there that fit for them? What supports, like the emergency aid that we were talking about, what supports are out there for, to avail yourselves of these opportunities? I think another big lesson is that, I know it's almost trite. We talk about lifelong learning, right? But the reality of having to continue to skill and upskill has been really made clear as a result of COVID. So what does that look like? What is the infrastructure for, the lifelong learning? How is it funded? What are the supports for people to be able to do that while they're also trying to support their families? We need to learn the lessons that, we were not prepared with our digital infrastructure, right? So having to go, right to online, it just really exposed that we weren't ready. So we have to do more around our digital technologies, making sure that we are making sure that people that are disconnected, right, are able to be connected. We know that there are issues around kind of digital equity. I'll just share a couple of more. I think that we also really learned that our supply and demand side, if you will, right? Like, so our post-secondary education and training system, is not always aligned to what employers need, right? And when those needs changed, our post-secondary education and training systems, really were in some ways flat-footed, right? And not able to kind of redesign really quickly. And so how do we connect supply and demand, and how can we innovate much more rapidly, I think. And then I think, Bridget touched on, and I guess it's not the elephant in the room anymore. It's just, it's something that we're talking about, the issues around kind of racial, economic inequality. It was so stark. It was so clear that the majority of, frontline workers were workers of color, Black and Latinx workers in harm's way of coronavirus, and the ones that kept their job in harm's way, many of them were the first to lose their jobs, right? And this was really not a surprise. We knew coming out of the Great Recession that these populations were vulnerable, right? And our reforms and innovations, just had not situated these populations in a position of strength. And so there's great work to do there as we redesign our systems. And I'll stop there. There's just so many lessons. I'm like Bridget, I could keep going and going with some of the things that we've learned.
Yeah, of course. And we appreciate that. I do want to create some space for us to talk a little bit about the policy implications of all that we have learned over the last year. And Michael, maybe I'll start with you. Is there a specific policy issue based on all of those lessons you just shared that your organization is really focused on as we come out of the pandemic?
I would just say, at a macro level, I think that we need to invest in, our kind of the strength and resilience of our workforce development system, right? So our post-secondary system and our workforce development system, we certainly believe, that there's an opportunity with the American Jobs Plan. So certainly, want to support that. But also, in addition to kind of, supporting kind of our workforce development infrastructure and making it more agile, we'd like to see a robust and modernized career navigation system with so many different types of training opportunities. There are, I think the latest evidence that there are close to 1 million different types of credentials, and close to half of those are traditional credentials, but then there are the industry-based credentials. How do learners and workers make sense of all of that, right? We need to support them as they make decisions about, kind of what's going to be best for them. And then I think, again, infrastructure for lifelong learning, we can't just keep talking about that. We need to invest in policy and incentives to build that infrastructure. How do we think about providing kind of financial support for people to kind of skill and upskill over the course of their working lives? What does that, look like? How do we create incentives for employers to be engaged in training kind of their workers and, kind of supporting talent pipeline, I think, are some other opportunities. And then, finally, kind of at a macro level, I think it's really important, we saw kind of our attempt. I think we got some things right, but then there's some lessons with what we tried to do to support workers who are in transition, right? So there was lots of debate about the, kind of the unemployment and insurance. And we think that it's really important for us to have a system that supports and protects workers, right, that are vulnerable in these kinds of transitions. So we certainly want to support kind of policies that that provide that support to workers in transition. So those are just some of the things that we think are policy opportunities, and we're working with our kind of both our partners on the ground and our working through coalitions in DC to kind of advocate for these policies.
Great, thank you. Bridget, I want to give you some space to keep the policy conversation going. Talk to us about some of your biggest priorities.
So as an organization, all of the work that we do through the direct service, through supporting other organizations, through training, building, and capacity building, at the end of the day, this is truly all about not only additionally scaling and the network effect outside of our organization and supporting other organizations that do this work, but it's about the data that we collect that can impact, influence, inform policy. And just a side note, that we do all of that. Change Machine is more than just a direct service and support. We do have our own fintech arm, be it our platform that we do all of this in. And so I elevate that because the importance of the data and information that we're collecting is going to be impactful towards some of the policy things that we're interested in. In context of this conversation, we're going to just talk a little bit about student loans and what are some things that we can do with the data that we're collecting, with the information, with the roundtables and the individuals who are being most impacted. What can we do to influence policy changes? Look, the low-hanging fruit is cancel the debt. But cancel the debt only fixes the immediate. It's not going to fix the continued. It's not going to answer to a system that has been set up, racially divided intentionally, where folks are still carrying debt and have paid on debt to know and paid, listen, just interest at this point for 25 years. I have horror stories. So how are we going to amend that and make that equitable across the board? So we're looking at different avenues to do it. There is a question about, how can employers get involved? I'm a straight shooter, so I need to preface it. All of that is one of the things that we've really been mindful of is who's at the table, where are the philanthropy, where's the pivots been made during the pandemic? And again, because of the culture and the tone at this time in regards to elevating Black lives and brown lives, that there's a pivot, there's a strong pivot, and money is going to institutions that have DEI lenses, it's going to HBCUs, but it's not enough just to fund these, right? We need to talk about the why you're funding. And so with that why comes some accountability and responsibility. And I say that even to the organizations and large corporations who are now mining HBCUs for students to come work for them because they fit the need at this moment. And that's an awesome thing. That's not a negative, but where's the accountability then to these employers who are getting high quality graduates to lend not only to their DEI lens, but also to the expertise of what they bring to the table with value? Why are we not talking about those organizations, those companies that are mining these Black and brown students, doing some type of, listen, it's a thought, you got to shoot for the stars and hope you grab the lab post. But why are we not talking about kind of a design of like a 401k match, but we call it something else, where those organizations, those companies are helping these individuals to pay down their debt. That's a start. That could be an immediate start, right? So you're going to put your money where your mouth is, because we acknowledge that this debt is out there, and that these individuals who are coming to you and potentially are making six figures are still behind the eight ball because of the amount of debt that they carry in reference and encounter to their white peers and colleagues. So that's one place that we're talking and doing some exploration. And of course, working with CRL, who has collected amazing data, and Ashley Harrington working with her. Our number right now is $50,000 cancellation, and let's say at the table so we can figure negotiating this. So those are some of the policy things that we're looking at in the immediate. And again, we want to carry this conversation because we are not just the best thinkers in the room. It takes collaboration, meaning Sam Ken, I will be reaching out to you immediately. Really interested in knowing what you're doing. I think there is a lot to be said about the workforce aspect also that JFF is talking about, and how we put those two things together for value. So yeah, those are some of the things we're working on.
Great, thank you. Sanket, we know that sometimes policies are driven by assumptions about who students and workers are, and those assumptions aren't always correct. And Bridget just talked about the ways in which fintech platforms can really collect data about who students are and what they need. And I would love to hear you talk a bit about, what you all have learned about who students are and what that means for their financial needs and what that means for their financial health.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really appreciate the lenses that Bridget and Michael have brought to the problem as well. But you have this narrative in a lot of these rooms and a lot of these spaces in fintech companies and financial health, where the assumption is that students are still 18 to 22, right? They take 4 years to graduate and then they get a job. But that is a relatively small minority. That's more around 20% of students who graduate in 6 years, right? And so our students, we serve 2 and 4 year institutions generally that serve low-income Americans, right? And they are more likely to be 25 to 40, right? They're likely to have children, right? They're likely to have jobs. They're likely to be facing multiple challenges, right? So it's not just housing, but food, childcare, health, medical debts on top of student debts that are accruing. And so the thing that we've learned is just the complexity of this problem. But as you start to step out of that complexity, to get into some of the constructive points that Bridget and Michael were raising, the thing that we're really learning is that students need us to design for them, right? We have all of these various benefits and all sorts of policymakers trying to scale up SNAP, trying to scale up TANF, trying to scale up all of these individual benefits. But if you look at the most vulnerable populations, Black and brown populations, the navigation of what is already available to them is impossible, right? And so that's why we exist as Edquity. And so I think there needs to be fundamental change to design for the folks we're trying to benefit. And to get at Bridget's point too, I think we at Edquity in particular, and I think everyone in this room, and in general, we're getting a little tired of we're describing the racial aspect of this problem in greater and greater detail, but not enough folks are doing something about it. And so I think moving to action on that piece, for instance, one of the things our approach is something that we study to ensure that it's anti-racist over time, in that we know levels of need are significantly higher in Black and brown populations and Native populations. And so our questionnaire, our algorithm doesn't actually take into account race. We just ask what a student's individual circumstances are, right? But then we look at our funding data and make sure that compared to the baseline student population, that we're more likely to fund Black and brown students because the needs are just greater in those communities. And when you open it up to essays and pictures and narratives, bias is more likely to creep in. And so we need these anti-racist approaches to do justice to the statistics we all throw around because candidly, I hear a lot of them all the time, but we need programmatic design to address them, and then we need to evaluate that they're being addressed, or else what was the point?
Yeah. Michael, one of the questions that has come in the chat that I wanted to get your take on, and I think we're hearing a bit of a theme around navigation, right? These sort of fragmented resources and programs and no real ability for folks to build coherent paths together, is what employers as stakeholders in this system can do to help connect the systems around post-secondary workforce development and the like. Is there a role for them to play in making this an easier pathway to navigate for job seekers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that employers are critical partners, right? And so as we think about the, we talk about the post-secondary education training system. I think we need to really kind of frame it the learn to work ecosystem, right? And it includes employers. And so one example of where employers really kind of come to the table. So JFF partnered with some other organizations to launch the Skill Up platform. And it's a platform where people can go to identify, like they can assess their skill needs. They get connected to employers, right? So training opportunities and employers. And so I think that we want to see more kind of post-secondary and workforce engagement, direct engagement with employers, right? Around kind of the competencies, the skills, that are needed for kind of real jobs, kind of in real communities. And so I think that as we assess our lessons, one of the lessons really is that authentic engagement. And in post-secondary, traditional post-secondary, historically it's been, you have an advisory committee of employers that you connect with, every, meeting. And it's just like we need something much different than that. And thankfully, one of the bright spots in this moment is employer groups have come together. Coalitions of employers have come together. We host a kind of a Recover Stronger network. It's a group of kind of employers who have come together to partner to think about and implement kind of policies that support learners and workers and support diverse talent pipelines and connecting them to opportunities. So I think that it's a great question, and I think employers are critical partners.
Great. We are coming up at time. So to close us out, I'm going to do a quick round robin, and I would love for each of you to share rapid fire answers to the following two questions. So we're looking for 1 to 3 words here. Now, the first question is, what's one thing from the past year you hope will change? And the second question is, what's one thing that you hope continues? I will start with Sanket. Awesome.
In terms of continues, I think the amount of funding and attention, and in terms of change, are the infrastructure available to make the funds effective.
Great. Bridget?
One thing from the past year I hope will change is, so much, the broken system. And I think one thing that I hope continues is this honest, transparent conversations that we've been forced to have over the last 16 months.
Great. And Michael?
One thing to continue, I'm with Bridget, kind of the current focus on populations. I think that needs to continue. One thing to change is we really need to modernize kind of the college mobility narrative, right? This whole notion that you go to college and everything's great after you graduate. We really have to update that. That's just, it's a myth, right?
Great. Well, thank the three of you so much for being with us today. This was a wonderful conversation. We so appreciate you taking the time, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate with all of you because, as Bridget said, it takes a village, and so appreciate the work you all are doing in this space.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
To conclude today's conversation on innovative solutions, I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight the newest cohort of fintechs joining the Financial Solutions Lab in 2021. As you heard from the panelists, many Americans were struggling to become financially healthy even before the pandemic. And over the last year, our research shows that Black Americans, people with low incomes, and women have borne the brunt of the economic consequences of the coronavirus crisis. This year, we're excited to support a set of fintechs that are equipping these individuals with financial tools, services, and protections that can help them improve their financial resilience and build long-term stability. Please join me in congratulating the 2021 Financial Solutions Lab Accelerator cohort. Daylight, a digital banking platform designed for the unique financial needs of LGBT+ people. Asusu, a data platform that helps low-income people build credit as they make monthly rental payments. Everyday Life, a life insurance provider offering affordable coverage that shifts based on life events. Home Lending Pal, a home lending marketplace using artificial intelligence and blockchain to improve the mortgage process for underserved first-time homebuyers. Leap Fund, a nonprofit offering a financial calculator that helps workers overcome benefits cliffs to achieve financial independence. Lifesaver, a mobile banking platform that empowers community banks and credit unions to advance consumer financial wellness. Seago, a bilingual mobile application offering affordable auto insurance to the Latinx and immigrant communities. And Upsolve, a nonprofit web application offering free access to bankruptcy and legal assistance and financial education. To learn more, you can visit finlab.finhealthnetwork.org. The link should be in your chat. And please keep an eye out for member-exclusive opportunities to engage with these companies later this year. Thank you all so much.